In this video, we will take a look at V-Rays 7 Update 3 and 4. For this, we will try out various new features on real-world examples and then see how those can help to speed up our workflow. So V-Rays 7 Update 3 and also very recently Update 4 have been released. And I thought I'd just make a video that basically summarizes the most important changes in both of those updates here so that you can see what new features are available and how you can use them. A great new feature in V-Rays 7 Update 4 is that you have now Vantage integration directly in your 3ds Max viewport. So for this, you just switch here your active shade to V-Ray GPU, and once you do this, you can see that Vantage here is starting in the background. And then once everything here is initialized, you can see that Vantage now shows directly in your 3ds Max viewport, which enables you to directly control, for example, your lights in here. So let's say I have the sunlight here, I can move it around and pretty much, of course, in real time here get really nice effects. I can light my scene here in real time and directly see the results here without having to constantly switch between 3ds Max and Vantage. I can change my shaders, for example. So let's say we give this a kind of bluish material here for this car. Or I can go in and change, for example, here the brightness of my mountains in the background. Let's make this brighter or darker. And again, let's play around with the sun a little bit until we get something that looks nice. Maybe some kind of evening lighting here. I think something like this was nice. And like this, directly see the finished result and you don't have to switch constantly between apps. And I think this is a really nice and great addition for Vantage and 3ds Max users. So here we have a rendering of an interior space. And another thing that you might have noticed in the V-Ray frame buffer up here already is this new additional button. And this will load the rendering that you have in your frame buffer to Chaos Veras. And that is their AI solution to further enhance the pictures here that you generated in the V-Ray frame buffer. So let's try that out and see what we can achieve with this. So for this, I just have to press this button here. Now you can see the V-Ray frame buffer will be uploaded to Veras. And then I have access here to this UI where I can define my image. So now in Veras, you can see there's different tabs up here. And at the moment we're in this Explore tab, and here you can see a selection of different quick presets that you can just enable to quickly get a result that you want. You can see it's all, of course, very heavily ArcViz based. And let's say, for example, we choose here this architectural sketch. If you hover over it, you can also see exactly what the prompt will look like. So here the prompt is architectural pen sketch, white paper. So let's just click this and then just choose render. You can see in the first slot, this is being rendered. And after a short time, you can see that now we have this nice sketch in here based on our rendering that we did in V-Ray. I think that's already quite cool. Let's try another preset, and here I found this quite complicated interior design board. So let's see what this will give us. Let's render this. And then once this is finished, you can see that this is actually quite nice. You can see it generated here this entire board where it placed the different furniture, the different things that we had here in our room. So you can get a summary of the overall design of the room. So I think this is quite nice. And let's try out another one. For example, here, this sharp interior. Let's see what it will do once we do this. And now since this is finished, you can see it changed now quite a lot in the picture, and it's up to you if that's exactly what you wanted. But as you can see, some of those presets here change a lot of things. And I would say this one looks now, let's say, more photorealistic in some areas and also more weird in other areas. So it's up to you to see if that is exactly what you're looking for. So if we want to further work on this image, we can go to the compose mode, and here you can further refine the prompt. You can see the base image is this one. It applies this prompt, and you could also say, for example, you don't want to have certain kind of elements in the scene. Let's say we don't want to have a dark floor, and let's also give it a bit more room here to change our geometry. So by default it is at 0, so that means it will stay very close to the original geometry. I will give it a bit more freedom now with the geometry, but I will give it a little bit less freedom here in terms of the materials, so it should stay more close to those original materials. And let's say, yeah, we can try out this, how this looks like. So let's render this. And now once this is finished, you can see that now we have this updated image in here. And as you can see, this is now more close to our original rendering. So you have some way to control here the AI a bit. You can see some elements are still not really how I would want them to be. So you could go in and further try to enhance this. There's also different kind of versions. For example, you could use Nano Banana Pro. So let's use this one and see what this will give us here. So let's render this. And then this one here would be the result using Nano Banana Pro. You can see the resolution here is maybe not really ideal. I think the original resolution here looked more sharp. That's because the resolution here is set to 1K. So let's change that, for example, to 4K. Let's say we also want to change the sofa to red velvet, for example. Let's just render this. And once this is done, you can see once you click this, actually that looks quite cool. So you can compare before and after. You can see exactly what was changed. The resolution now is much more crisp. We have our red velvet sofa, exactly like what we prompted. Like this, you can get some quite expected and nice results in here. In the Edit tab, you can then further enhance here your edits. You have some tools where you can draw certain kind of areas here in your image to further guide the AI. But let's instead go to the Video tab in here, because I think this is maybe the most interesting. And here you can choose the source image. So let's say we would choose our rendered image. So that's the one with the red sofa. And now let's say we give it here a prompt that the camera is pushing slightly in. I want to have like some circular camera movement around the table. And also I want to pretend that there's some kind of wind in the room and the plants and the curtains here are moving slightly. So let's see what this will give us by just pressing here on the render button. And then once that's finished, you can see that in your browser, and let's see what it did. So yes, the camera is pushing in slightly. That's correct. The other things it seemed to have ignored. There's no flowing wind in here. There's no circular movement around the table. So you have the usual quirks with AI video generation. It's a little bit hit and miss, but you have the option here directly to do these kind of like simple movements directly from Veras, and then you don't really need to render this, and you can save a lot of time with this. So whenever we have a scene like this in here, we know that we have to use caustics in order to make, especially here, our water in the pool look realistic. And let's enable this here now. And traditionally you do this here in the GI tab by just enabling here the caustics. And there are two different calculation methods, photo mapping and progressive. Let's use progressive for now. Let's just restart here the rendering. You can see we have some caustics that appear here, but you can also notice that rendering this is actually quite slow. It starts very splotching here in the beginning, and it will take quite a long time until those here clear up. And like this, you might tend to not use them if you don't really have to do it, because as said, the effect here is quite expensive to render. The upside for using those traditional caustics here in V-Ray is that those work in any kind of situation, under any kind of lighting condition. So they are very flexible and easy to use, but as said, the downside is the rendering speed. So now let's check out here the caustics render element to just see how those caustics here look like. You can see which influence the caustics here have on the scene. And now that we explored quickly here the traditional caustics in V-Ray 7 update 3, there's now new caustics which work completely separate from those built-in caustics in here. So we can disable those, and let's just restart the rendering. You can see, of course, we don't have any caustics showing up because those new quick caustics, they're handled here in the shaders. So here I have the material for the water surface, which is a standard V-Ray material. And down here, there's a new tab called Quick Sun Caustics. And if we enable here the caustics for the reflection and refractions, especially here for the water, you can see that we immediately have some caustics showing up here in our pool. And as you can hopefully also see is that the image here clears up much quicker. We don't have this very splotchy appearance here in the beginning, and now the image is pretty much finalized. So this, compared to the traditional caustics, of course, is way quicker. And of course, this is an additional system. It's not meant to replace the caustics because this is some kind of a shader trick. So there are situations where this doesn't really work as good. And also, as the name here also suggests, you require a V-Ray sunlight in order for this to work. It doesn't work with any kind of other lights in your scene. So there's some caveats to that, but the upside, of course, is that in many situations like this in here, it works quite quick and you can get quite a comparable result. I noticed that some things are different. For example, here, so I increased the size of my sunlight and you can see we have these kind of like soft shadows, but here now in the pool, for example, those shadows here are completely crisp. You can see that here they are soft, and then once they're in the water, they're completely crisp, which is caused by this new quick sun caustics. So I said there are some downsides to this, but in many situations you probably don't really notice any big difference and you get quite a bump in rendering speed. Let's also enable those caustics here for these reflective materials by just enabling here also especially the caustic for the reflections. And you can see we also get some kind of reflective caustics here on the floor, which don't look quite the same as they did look like with the correct caustics calculation. But oftentimes you don't really need the precision and you just need some kind of effect here that appears on the floor. So in this situation, it works actually quite nice. So again, the requirements for those caustics here are that you use a V-Ray sun. And then I also noticed that you require a real displaced surface here for this to work. While the traditional caustics, they also work, for example, with bump maps. But those ones here, they need the real geometry displacement here to work correctly. And let's check out here the render element to also compare this. And you can see once you check the render element, yeah, first of all, it's much clearer. There's almost no noise in here, but you can also see that there's some kind of shader trickery here involved in order to get this kind of effect. It looks like some kind of half transparent planes. But as said, the result here, if you see the finished image, look quite nice. And this is quite a nice solution in order to just get some quick caustics without the downside of excessive rendering times. So in V-Ray 7 Update 3, Gaussian Splats also received a nice upgrade. And here we have this scene with a kind of like specific lighting. You can see we have some greenish and bluish light sources. And our Gaussian Splat here doesn't really look very integrated into the scene because it looks like it's getting its own lighting, its own coloring and so on. And now in V-Ray 7 Update 3, we have the option here to enable lighting. And this will make here the Gaussian Splat affected by the scene lighting. So let's enable this and see what we will get. So you can see as soon as I enable this, we have quite nice lighting here, and our strawberry in this case looks way better integrated in our scene. So it basically just takes the tinting of our scene lighting and then also transfers this to our Gaussian splats. So don't really expect some moving speculas or something like this on the Gaussian splat if you move your light around. It is still a Gaussian splat and it's still not real 3D geometry, of course, but this way it makes it look very integrated here in your scenes. So you can modify here the lighting blend, and this means basically how much of the scene lighting here is influencing our Gaussian splats. So if I turn this all the way to 0, that means our Gaussian splat here is getting no scene lighting at all. That's the real colors from the Gaussian splat. And the value of 1 means it gets the maximum contribution here from the scene. Like this, you get the maximum integration here. So in order to make these shadows here appear nicer, we can also enable here the normals, because this is required for shadows. And you can see that now, for example, if I have here my shadow plane, and let's say I move this around in my scene a little bit. This is now also nicely influencing here our strawberry. And you can see we can get some real quite nice effects in here, where the strawberry looks now much better integrated, and as said, also behaves correctly in our scene lighting. So this change here now overall makes it much nicer to use Gaussian splats in your scene, because they don't really stick out that much anymore, and they integrate nicely with the other elements in your scene. So now Chaos Scatter also supports the scattering of decals, and here I have these 3 different decals. You can see I have some cracks, I have these 2 different patches in here, and I want to now use Chaos Scatter to scatter those decals here onto my surface. And for this I already selected here the different wall objects where I want to place the decals onto, and now we just need to select here our decals, and then those will be scattered on the wall itself. So let's do that. Let's just pick here the cracks first. You can see something is already happening. We have these decals which are now scattered on the surface. You can also see that already here in the rendering. We can now also select the first patch. You can see we have a different decal now scattered, and the second patch as well. Because this gets a little bit messy now, let me just play a bit with the colors to make it just much more visible. And here I just assigned a multi-subtexture to those different decals, so we can better see what's going on in here. So now we can choose to further customize this. For example, let's say we want to add more of those cracks, but we want to have less of those patches. We can play here with the frequency. For example, let's find here our cracks and let's increase the frequency to 5. This way we should have more cracks and overall less patches. And down here you can see the overall count now is set to 1000. Let's increase this maybe to 2000, and then we will get overall more of those things here happening. And if we want to, we can also go to our transformations down here and just play with the scale variation. So let's choose, for example, a variation from 1% to 150%. So we should have quite a big variation here in those different patches and cracks. And let's just go up and maybe increase the count a bit more. I think like this, it maybe looks nice. Let's just remove here our coloring again to see the finished result. And then I think like this, you can see that we quickly were able to add some additional variations here to our surface and break up here the repetitiveness of the patterns. And I think like this is quite a nice system here to quickly add these kind of like variations to large scale surfaces in kind of a procedural way without having to manually place them everywhere. And like this, you can quickly reach quite nice results in here. The V-Ray frame buffer received some nice upgrades, and now, for example, we have these 2 default folders, backgrounds and foregrounds, and here we can compose some additional elements here together with our rendering. So in this case, let's say we want to add a backplate, so we would go to the backgrounds folder in here. Let's just add a new image layer. Then we could just easily load here a backplate, and now because this is in the backgrounds folder, it will be used as a backplate. And if I put this here in the foregrounds folder, you can see that now it will be composed on top of our rendering. But in our case, of course, we want to use that as a background. And you can see that now there's this additional bar. Let's just move this down here, and we can easily now interactively define here our backplate. We can choose, for example, a different size. We can rotate that. We could even flip that here horizontally and vertically, for example. Or if we want to reset everything, let's click here on the fit button. And now we're back to our starting point. So now you can much better interactively place your image layers here directly in the frame buffer and get exactly the end result that you want to achieve. Another nice addition is the histogram up here, and at the moment it shows nothing because I'm still rendering. But once I have my first rendering finished, I can just stop this here. You can see that now the histogram shows all the data of my rendered image, and this can give me a lot of additional information. For example, I can also select here a color range, and then I can see, okay, this range here would exactly define these yellow marked colors in here. If I want to just check where my highlights are, I can just put a marker in here, and you can directly see which of those areas are the ones here in this histogram. So I think that's quite nice. Also, for example, it gives you information that if you add here, let's say an exposure element on top, and we are clamping accidentally our highlights, you can see that here, because this is flatlining and because here the histogram shows these different channels here as complete black, we know that now our image here is clamped, our whites are not white anymore, and we know we did some mistake here in our color correction. So let's delete this here again. You can see that now here the whole range is used again, and we have a properly balanced image. So this histogram here gives you a lot of these additional information, and you can make the right decisions in your tone mapping workflow. So in Chaos Cosmos, there is now under 3D models here a new category called Parallax Interiors. And if you click this, you can download some nice parallax interior textures that you can use in your scenes. And I want to show you what this does exactly. So here I just loaded this image texture and I just imported it into my scene. You can see this is just here a simple plane. So if I check this here from the side, it's just basically a polygon here. It doesn't have any depths and so on. But if you see how this looks here in the rendering, you can see there's some nice parallax effects in here. For example, if you look at it from the bottom, you can see the roof here with some nice lights. And if you look a little bit from the top down, you can see that the roof here is not visible anymore. Let's just tweak this a little bit. So if I now pick here this element, you can see it's a simple V-Ray material, and I have this new V-Ray parallax texture in here. And here we can define our different layers. So for example, if we don't want to have these foreground chairs here, we can just remove them. If we don't want to have here these curtains, I can also remove those. And those are kind of individual for each of those different presets that you can load from the Chaos Cosmos library. At the moment, there is not a huge selection of those here available yet, but I assume those will be updated over time. Right now, you can do already a lot of things with this. You can also define here the width aspect ratio. So if you want to, you can make the room here smaller. In this case, we don't really want that. And we can also play here with our depth. So let's just choose, for example, an angle where we can see the depth a little bit. And then we can define, for example, that the room shouldn't be as deep. And like this, just fine tune it to fit exactly to your scene. So right here, you can see a practical example of this. And the way I did this is quite simple. So let's just hide here our house. And in this case, I would just also go down here with the brightness so we can better see what's going on. And I have here these different elements, as you can see. And I just combine multiple parallax textures here with a simple V-Ray multi-subtexture, put the mode here to random, and then put a different kind of interior texture here on each of those windows. And I also leave some of those windows here black. Can, for example, define that we want to have less of those windows here black. And then you can see that we can get some quite nice results here. And if we move our camera around, you can see we have these randomized interiors here, which basically don't require any modeling. You can see this is very simple. There's no excessive geometry or anything like this inside. It's basically just shader based. Like this, we can just easily place this in our building facades. And once I put my building here back again, and I just bump up the brightness to, let's say, 5, for example, you can see that we get this nice interior look here for our windows. And it's very easy to just replicate this for a lot of your buildings and your scenes and get these kind of like nice nighttime shots where it really looks like there is some interior here in your building and it's not just a flat image texture that you map on your facades. Like this, you get a much more three-dimensional look in here. So the V-Ray AI enhancer has been improved, and here we have an image that I want to try this on, and I just need to upload here this data. So let's just upload this. And then I can open this here in the Chaos Cloud. And now in Chaos Cloud, we can either choose to enhance the entire image, or if we go to this edit mode, do some advanced controls. So let's first enhance the overall image and see what this result gives us. So after a short processing time, this here would be the enhanced version. Let's compare both of them by just pressing here on the compare button. Then you have this slider in here, and you can see especially here the face has been improved, so it looks less CG, and just overall there's just way more sharpness here in the image. Also some parts here like plants and vegetations, they have been improved significantly, so you can see that this here, that's the updated version, looks much more realistic and refined compared to our render version here, but it didn't really touch much of our overall rendering here, and that's intentional. So by default it just improves people, vegetation, but just leaves the overall feeling here in place, and also just increases here the sharpness, so you can see that the overall picture is now way more sharp. But if you want to, let's go back here to our original version, you could also choose the edit mode here. Let's go to the AI enhancer in here. And if we do this now, we have control over our different elements. You can see that I can choose, for example, this wall here, and I can create a new enhancements. And let's say, for example, we want to make here the age of the wall much older, or let's say we want to make it very dirty. So let's increase the creativity here a lot. And let's say we want to have this concrete, for example, and you could add some additional details in here. So let's see what this gives us. Let's press here the enhance button. And now this is running here in the background. Let's also choose the whole person here, create a new enhancement. And let's say we want to have this here as a senior, for example, female. And you could also change the ethnicity. So let's see if this works. Let's make her an Asian senior female and increase here the creativity to high, for example, to get the maximum effect. And now our person here has been finished already. So you can see we have definitely someone Asian, also a little bit older. So I think this is basically what we prompted for. So you can compare here a different version. This one would be the original. This one here is the one we did earlier with the overall enhancement. And then this one here is the one where we just chose here this person and only changed her. Our surface here is still being processed, so we still have to wait for this a bit. And now this here has been processed. Let's just compare here the before and after. And I would say, yeah, you can see definitely only those parts here changed. Is it exactly what I imagined? I imagined basically that it would look way more dirty. I think it actually looks more clean than it did before. So that's the things with AI. You sometimes get unexpected results. But as you can see, it's basically just applying these changes here only to the selected parts. And by trial and error, you can then find out which slider works specifically well for your type of image. So those were, in my view, the most important changes in V-Ray 7 Update 3 and also Update 4 summarized in one video. Of course, you can find a more detailed list here on the website where you can go through all of the different changes here in more detail. You can see all the bug fixes and so on. So there has been way more than I could show in this video. If you want to support my channel, you can do that by just subscribing or also visiting my Patreon, where you can download all of my scene files and also watch a whole course on car rendering and get lots of other additional goodies. Otherwise, see you next tutorial. Take care and see you soon.